Welcome all, and thank you very much for turning up for tonight's webinar on carbon farming methods. And our guest speaker, James Henderson from Isidore, and Vol Norris from AgForce Queensland and Northwest Regional Manager. I'd just like to acknowledge that tonight our webinar is delivered with funding support from the Commonwealth of Australia through the Department of Climate Change, Energy and the Environment and Water under the Carbon Farming Outreach Program in collaboration with Grower Group Alliance. So thanks to the government for this funding to be able to deliver this information to all you producers and ag industry people. So Vol, if you'd like to just introduce yourself for tonight, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Mo. Hi, everyone. I'm Vol Norris. I'm the Northwest Regional Manager for AgForce. I'm sitting in Longreach, and I'll cover the Northwest up to the Gulf and out to the NT border. And it's nice to be here. Thanks for everyone for joining in tonight. Good to see so many people on board.
And James, if you could introduce yourself.
Yep. Thanks, Mo. G'day, everyone. James Henderson. I'm a beef producer by trade. We're in southern CQ, sort of North Burnett. So I'm in Thangool tonight, if anyone knows where that is. Beef producer by trade. We have a couple of carbon projects that are going back. We started them in 2017. I did spend a fair bit of time with AgForce on various boards and committees. And then after that, with a couple of other producers, we started our own fee-for-service consulting company, which is Isidore Ag, basically to help producers navigate all the jargon and all the processes. So I'll be your person presenting tonight. So if you got any questions on the way through, please just sing out or put your hand up on the way through, so you don't have to wait till the end of the section. I will stop periodically to ask for questions. If you don't feel like talking out loud or anything, so just feel free to stick them in the chat, and Mo will Vol will let me know if there's stuff in the chat. But yeah, it's about him from me.
Thanks, James. And yeah, so I'm just going to be driving the PowerPoints tonight and helping James in the background. So thanks very much, everybody. I'm Mo Pedersen from AgForce Training, and I reside on the Atherton Tablelands in far north Queensland. Currently sitting in Croydon, doing some training out here. Anyway, over to you, James, to start delivery of the webinar tonight.
Yeah, right. Thanks very much, mate. So yeah, look, we'll start with a bit of a basic glossary, just in case people haven't done the other webinars in this series, because we do talk about these basic terms throughout the webinar and part of the series. So just we'll touch, if you don't understand the acronym at the time, just please put your hand up and say, what was that acronym? What did it mean? Because there's a fair few of them. The main one we'll be talking about tonight is an ACU, or Australian Carbon Credit Unit. It's a standardised transferable emissions offset credit. What it does is represents 1 tonne of CO2e emissions. So for every 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent, you get 1 ACU. So it's a 1-to-1. We talk about greenhouse gases, so that's obviously your main one is carbon dioxide, methane. Nitrous oxide's a big one, particularly when we start talking things like savanna burning. Insetting is basically using credits or practices or implementation of products, strategies inside your own business to reduce your emissions footprint. Offsetting is basically getting an ACU and generating an Australian carbon credit unit and selling it. And SOC is obviously soil organic carbon. Next slide, please, Mo. Oh,
Might have lost Mo. You there, Mo? Mo might have ducked out. I don't know.
Are you
I don't
driving
have.
bowling?
I know I don't, but I had a copy of your slides, so my apologies. We should have organised this a bit better, but I'm sure May will pop back in a minute.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. Let me dig one up while we're waiting. There we go.
Oh, yeah. We've jumped forward a few there. Yep. Is it
You there, mate?
the delay because of the
Yep.
Starlink? I'm guessing. There we go.
Like Mo's data speed might be a bit dodgy in Croydon by the looks of
Yeah, it was good last night.
it. Okay.
Right. So yeah, the first one we'll be talking about is Savannah burning project. So the clue about this way of generating AgForce is in the name. It's basically based around fire in the Gulf countries. A really short version of it. Next slide, please, mate. And it's a pretty simple project. That what you're going to do is you're going to essentially change the way you manage the fire on your farm. So instead of having a few larger hotter fires every couple of years, you're going to drop the overall average of your fire intensity down. Some of the good things about this is essentially the underlying agricultural use is not lost. So opposed to planting trees or blue carbon or some other methods, it sort of works very hand in hand with agriculture. It's pretty easy to apply to large areas, which makes it cost effective. It's run on a premise of emissions avoidance. So essentially, the emissions never reach the atmosphere, as opposed to other methods where they're based on drawing down emissions from the atmosphere. So they sort of tend to be a bit more questionable. They got more questions around integrity and things like that. Savannah burning is pretty simple. The stuff never makes it to the atmosphere, so it's a more desirable method. The other really good thing about it is it often works really well with First Nations and Aboriginal groups because of its emissions avoidance, and you can tie it to the local cultural mobs. It generates a really good premium for the product. So up to double the price is not uncommon, which makes it pretty desirable. There's not too many products. Like I said, you could go double the prices of your bullocks. You'd be pretty interested to know how, right? So it is quite desirable for those people who can undertake it. Some of the cons are the ACCU yields are not guaranteed. It's very much, you can't model and say we're going to make this much this year and this much the year after. It's sort of, you just got to wait and see how it rolls out. Returns to relative to asset values are a bit lower, and that's a bit of a banking thing. So the banks sort of look at Savannah burning a bit differently. And probably the big risk is late wet seasons that inhibits the early fires. And I think there's been some examples up north of that sort of happen already. Next slide, please, Mo. So this is a really good graph, just a really good explanation for what essentially a Savannah project is. So on the left there, the blue vertical bars, that's your historical fires. So all those historical, you've got to look back 10 years, and the average of those historical fires makes the red line. So the red horizontal line is the average of the blue. And you can see there above in the blue there, you've got sort of three really big ones above that red line. So when we're scoping this with people, the conversation in the lounge room or living room with graziers and producers is, have you had three big hot fires in the last 10 years that you can think of off the top of your head? Where you're just burning, it got a bit out of control, burn a bit longer for normal or whatever, something like that. And essentially you're going to commit to burn below the average. So going forward, so you're looking at the orange, if you will, is your project emissions, and you get paid the green. So little green bar, you get paid the difference between what your long-term average is and what you're now currently burning. And by doing it every year, you'll sort of generate a different amount every year. So it's like I say, that's why you can't model it. Next slide, please, Mo. The basic eligibility requirements, and we've touched on some of this earlier in the webinar. The key point of additionality: you can't be business as usual. A lot of producers have started to move to those earlier season burns anyway, just because they're easier to manage. So a lot of times you find people don't actually have probably missed their opportunity to go into a savanna burning project because they've sort of started to move their practices. So you can't get paid for business as usual. The location for this stuff, like it's, like I say, it's got to be up in the Gulf in the 600 to 1,000 mil rainfall zone. It's got to be somewhere you're burning regularly. It can't be somewhere like in the, the Darling Downs or the Burnett country or somewhere like that where you get a fire every 5 years. Obviously, like there's got to be significant management practice change, and you've got to keep good records of that. So records of what paddocks you burnt, when you burnt them, how you burnt them. Are you using like the little drops from the helicopters, or are you using just fire bugs, dropping matches or whatever it's going to be, and all those things you put together. There's things around land tenure and permanence and Indigenous involvement. Obviously, the permanence is a bit easier in savanna burning because it's emissions avoidance, so the issues around permanence are a bit different. But ultimately, it is a pretty workable method, and you can see the number of credits generated on the regulator's website. It's a pretty popular method for some people. Next slide, please, mate. So the big questions and the main one everyone always asks is, what are the yields? Well, 0.5 to 3 ACCUs per hectare per year is pretty achievable. Some are less, some are more, but that sort of seems to be the average. And obviously, that varies year to year. It's a very generic number, but you're not. If someone comes along to you and says you're going to make 10 ACCUs per hectare per year, they're probably having a lend of you. Once again, this is providing that you've had those historical hot fires and you haven't already moved your fire practice. Anywhere of those, what are the best areas? Well, that's those, those big areas in the Gulf. So you need decent hectares. You can't really do this on, 50,000 acres, maybe 50,000 hectares. You'll start to get up there, but you need those areas that are burnt pretty regularly. If emissions go above a baseline in a given year, the method accommodates for this, and basically they pause the project until you catch up. And this is actually true of all methods. If something goes wrong, very rarely are they going to chase you down for ACCUs and say, oh, you need to pay back those credits. What generally happens for all projects is they pause the project and then they say, well, once you catch up and you get back in front, well, then you'll start getting issued credits again and you can sell those credits once you sell them. The information is, just basic fire mapping. That's largely based on a website called NAFI. So anyone who likes to do a bit of snooping, it's pretty interesting. It's not on Globe, it's its own website. NAFI, Northern Australia Fire Index, I think it stands for. And it's really good historical fire mapping. Other thing that should be considered is stacking non-carbon environmental frameworks. So things like accounting for nature and other, biodiversity type frameworks that can really also add to either a price multiplier or just, something that can, stand on its own. And while you've got people in the field making the most of people on your property. Next, please, mate. Sorry, is there any questions on savanna?
Nothing in the chat yet, Jones. And hands up? Can't see any hands up right now. Unless anyone's got a burning question, just sing out. They're all happy.
You won't get in trouble for singing out either. It's not school, so. Right, we'll go on to soil carbon projects, and these are by far the most popular at the moment with producers and particularly in southern parts of Australia. So that's a soil carbon core rig. The most basic form of a soil carbon core rig is actually your Christie post thumpers. So most people would have a Christie post thumper for whacking in steelies. They were actually originally designed for whacking down soil cores. So if you are a bit curious and you want to do a bit of your own snooping around on your property, if you've got a Christie post thumper, you can just buy the cores off Christie for, I don't think it's a lot of money. It might be about $200 or something. But anyway, next slide, please. Oh. We got a delay again.
Must have, I think.
Yeah.
You're there, aren't you, mate?
I hope he's there.
Yeah. Actually, while we're waiting, can I just check?
I am here. Can you see me or?
You can't see your face, but we can hear your voice.
No, yep. I'm just keeping the video off to try and keep it as good as I can.
Yeah. Have you tried
You
to
need the
change the
next
slide yet?
slide?
Yeah, mate. Please, yep. Okay, so yeah, the basic overview of the soil carbon projects. Essentially, you're changing the way you manage your farm to increase the levels of stored carbon in your soils. As producers, most of us try and do this anyway. Like no one's out there trying to degrade their soils, but you're just trying to really amplify and ramp that up to a degree. So most people have a degree. If you've got well-managed country, you probably have a reasonable amount of soil carbon in your soil. Once again, under additionality permits, you can't get paid for what's there. It's about what you increase. The underlying the pros of it, the underlying agricultural pursuit's not lost. So once again, unlike trees or soil carbon, trees or blue carbon, soil carbon works very well with agricultural systems because most people like to build their soil carbon on their farm. It's typically simpler to, apply to large areas. It's pretty well sorted out, the methodology and the way you go about applying it, which is better than some of the other methods. And it obviously has those positive side effects, on your property. So if you've got more carbon in your soil, you've got more water holding capacity. If you've got more water holding capacity, you're going to have more grass or more crop or whatever that might be. Some of the cons are, at the end of the day, the ACCUs are not guaranteed because it's a full measured model. So you measure once and then you measure later on, you get paid the difference. So as opposed to some of the tree planting methods and some of the blue carbon methods or some of the other regenerative methods, you don't get a model forecast that's particularly accurate. Like you can have a bit of a guess, but it's not going to be as accurate as you'd like it to be. The practice changes usually represent a significant cost to the property, particularly over the 25 years of the project. So, all these projects are 25 to 100 years. Not many people do 100. Most people do 25 for obvious reasons. And I suppose the practice change, depending on what it is, you can sort of lump it up at the start and taper it out at the end. But it does represent a cost, particularly on top of the sampling. So they are a front-end heavy project to get off the ground, which is a barrier for a lot of people because depending on the size of your operation, you might be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per time you pay for sampling and then all your upgrades to increase your store carbon. Next slide, please, Mo. So this is the basic eligibility requirements of the method from the regulator, and there's a list there of sort of 9, and most people get a bit confused about it. Like you can apply nutrients, you can do pasture improvements, establishing. So a lot of people sort of look at Lakina and things like that. Establishing new irrigation, like it's not really relevant for most people in Queensland. It's more of a southern thing. Converting no-till to no-till, so getting out of the recreational tillage game. But once again, I think most people got out of that, like with the direct drills in Queensland, probably in the early 2000s. Not sure there's too many big plows going around these days. Modification of landscapes and those sorts of things. But the overwhelming majority of soil carbon projects that are done in Australia all come down to altering stocking rate, duration, or intensity of grazing. So that is basically boxing up your cattle and rotating it, whether you call it cells, whether you call it rotational grazing, depending on your definition. Basically, you're going to have more paddocks, not less. Next slide, please, mate. So this is just a couple of AgriWeb screenshots of two of our places. On the left is the breeder property. On the right is the backgrounding property. So when we sort of talk to producers, this is what I'd call a small opportunity, is the one on the left. So that's our breeder property. Essentially, it's 10 big paddocks and 10 small paddocks. Now, for us to make that into a viable soil carbon project, we'd probably have to box up a couple more of those breeder mobs into bigger mobs, and then cut those 10 big breeder paddocks into 20, and then cut those 10 smaller paddocks into 20 as well. So cut every paddock on the place in half and then box up the mobs. So it's a pretty significant undertaking. Like you've got to be really dedicated to do it. And, some people are, and they do it, and they do it well. Like we've got a number of soil carbon projects around us. And obviously it's a bit of a leap for a lot of people. So we often find people already have some degree of rotation. So obviously on that property there, like less than half our paddocks have got cattle in them at any one point in time. There is a degree of rotation, but it's probably not enough to simply walk straight into a soil carbon method. We'd need to increase the intensity of it. The one on the right, this is where we probably should have done soil carbon, because back in the day we had, I think, 4 paddocks on that property. I think we're up to about 8 or 9 now. And essentially, we box the cattle up, and it doesn't matter their age or their weight class now. They just go around as one mob. And that's probably where we really should have done a soil carbon project. But we weren't geared up to do it, so we didn't do it. Once again, to make that to a soil carbon project now, we'd have to cut every paddock in half again. So taking from 8 paddocks to 16, which is actually feasible. We're actually doing that in our business, in our cattle business at the moment, just doing the numbers again and again on that place, trying to work out if we want to actually go through with it. Next slide, please, Mo. So the Agri production. So look, it basically, like whatever the highest amount of soil that's it represents the amount of soil carbon stored in your soil, and it basically goes from your baseline to your high point. So you're looking at the change of organic soil carbon levels. You're going to go through, you're going to measure things like the bulk density, and you're going to do things like convert it from CO2e to from soil carbon to CO2e. So that's where you times it by 3.67, and they're all the bits of the method that you usually either get a consultant, or that's what you pay a aggregator or soil carbon company to do. It's quite common to get yields of 1.4 to 5.5 tons per year. It's not outrageous to think that you might get 6 or 7, but when you hear people talking 10 tons and things like that, it does get a bit questionable whether you could maintain it and whether things actually have been recorded correctly. Next slide, please, mate. So this is a pretty bit like the Savannah graph, a very simple diagram trying to illustrate of how it actually works. So on the left-hand side there, we're looking at what's essentially our baseline. So we look back, and you need all your historical data, you need historical emissions, you need a pretty good baseline of what your stocking numbers were and what your fuel usage, all those things are, and it basically gives you a rough indication of what was happening on your property before. And then we baseline the property. So you go around, you punch all your soil carbon cores in. You then undertake your practice change. So for us, that would have been we'd whack all those paddocks, and we go and cut all those paddocks up, and then we get the increase. So once, a bit like your Savannah one, once you remeasure and you rebaseline in about 5 years, you get paid on the difference. You can do it any time between 1 and 5 years, but most people go to 5 years because that gives you the most amount of time to sequester carbon. And then after that, you might find that your soil carbon levels might drop. You might have a drought. Then if your practice change continues, you should have successive small amounts of gain. What tends to be the thinking on this from the academics is that you'll get the big sugar hit at the start, and you'll get smaller and smaller as time goes on. No one's really 100% sure, because no one's run a soil carbon project for 25 years, what the upper limits are for this sort of stuff. But it's not widely considered that it'll just keep going up and up and up and up. Once again, the same as the Savannah one. So if you go below a baseline period, basically you're not required to pay back ACCUs or anything. So if you drop between the first and the second arrow, if you drop below it on your third arrow, you don't need to pay back ACCUs. Your project is paused, and you'll rebase baseline 5 years' time, and you hopefully pick it up then. Pardon me. Next slide, please, mate. So what sort of yields? So over the life of the project, pretty common to hear that 40 to 150 tonnes per hectare, which is a pretty significant amount. And once again, they're only estimated yields. You won't know until you actually do the project. The best place to do it, and this is the other ones where people get caught, you really need soils that have good clay content. Because if you did some of the earlier workshops with this, you would have seen Richard Eckart's diagram, and he talks about leaching. So in those southern soils where they do leach a lot of carbon, if you have a heavy clay, that leaching essentially is very low and it gets locked up. So you need that clay to sort of make sure the carbon that gets stored in your soil doesn't disappear. And you also need that reasonable rainfall, which is 100, that's 600 mil. So we're generally talking east of the Great Divide. As I said before, if the soil carbon goes below credited, well, it's not that bad because you won't be required to pay back any ACCUs. They'll pause the project, wait for you to catch up and go again. The soil cores, like they are, running at a depth between sort of 30 to 100 centimetres, so they're pretty deep. They use the randomised sampling point, so there's no way you can. A lot of people say, "Oh, I'll beat the method." It's very hard to beat the method with the randomised sampling points and the integrity that goes behind it. That's obviously why soil carbon projects are worth a lot of money too, as are all ACCUs comparatively to international methods. Is that integrity piece behind it? I think that's the last slide for soil, is it, Mo? Have we got any questions on the soil carbon piece?
Nothing in the chat, James, but I'm sure there are some burning questions people have got keen to hear. Just yell out people or else click the raise your hand button if you've got something. Claire Walker. Fire away, Claire.
G'day. I'm just about the requirements. There's a few projects sort of popping up in our part of the world, but our rainfall is really not reliable at 600. And the soils are very variable. There are some very heavy clays, and then it tapers off to lighter, less clay type soils. We've done some preliminary things where they've said we'd potentially be a project area, but I'm kind of a bit skeptical about our ability to actually sequester the carbon given the weather and soil that we actually have.
Yep, that's probably fair enough. So I suppose it's going to come down to if you put the variable rainfall to one side. So I'm assuming maybe you might be just on that lighter end of the 600 sort of stuff. So how much percentage of your property is the heavier clay, where you're more confident, and then it becomes the next question is how dedicated are you to saying really amping up production. So if you're really dedicated to say, right, we're going to really cut up these, we're going to spend a lot of money on polyposts and wire, we're going to cut these paddocks up, and we're going to commit to this project, you might find you can mitigate some of those other factors like rainfall variability, but it's 100% up to you. And without knowing the individuals, I don't expect you to tell me over the webinar, but you can contact me individually if you've got questions on it. But yeah, that's my really high level view, if that makes sense, Claire.
Yeah, thanks, James. I might contact you after the webinar and just talk a few things because, I'm interested in doing one, but I've got a lot of questions still. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I think another one there.
Yeah, g'day, James. Al Vickers from down southern Queensland. Not sure if this is applicable to you, but I'm just wondering, is there any issues with virtual fencing? Do they create problems for the types of projects that you're working on?
That's a really good question. I haven't had that one before. That's on my list to ring the regulator and actually see if virtual fencing qualifies as fencing. Was my understanding. I do believe that those companies were talking to the regulator because there was some confusion whether the virtual fencing was contributing enough, like was enough of a management action change, because I think the problem from the regulator's point of view is it's not permanent. Like if you build a fence, it's very permanent, but at any point the collars can come off, I think was the regulator's problem. So I actually don't know where that's landed, Al. And I'll put it on my list to chase it up if you want. Because it is a good question. Because when I was looking at it myself, thinking, "Geez, I wonder how you can do that with that." Because the advantage of virtual fencing, obviously, is the fence can be anywhere, right? So it's
yeah, you can move it just by sliding your mouse across a computer screen. So.
Yeah, it's pretty cool tech, eh? I'll give them that. So yeah, so you got it in, have you? Like you got some virtual fencing?
No, it's just becoming quite popular. I'm a rural financial counsellor in southern Queensland. I had a couple of clients who are doing it for drought work at the moment. So obviously, it's just one of those variables that you got to factor in when you're going to make the investment towards virtual fencing or not, if you're trying to do carbon at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. I think you got to do the cost benefit analysis. Is the virtual fencing cheaper than the actual fencing? If soil carbon is your outcome,
Sure.
I think you just got to do that quick cost benefit analysis, whether the collars are. But if you're just chasing herd management, as opposed to soil carbon, well, maybe the collars are better than the carbon. So I think probably depends what lane you want to probably stick in, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Can't see any more hands up yet, James, unless anyone's got another question at this point. No, everyone's pretty happy, I think, James.
No worries. Sorry, my voice is given away. I've been yelling at two very misbehaving dogs that wouldn't do what I wanted them to do today. So I lost my voice a bit from belly aching all day. But anyway, apologies for that. Environmental planting. So this is exactly what the method says. It's literally planting trees. Next slide, please, mate. So the concept's pretty simple. You're planting native species into non-forest ground. So somewhere where trees don't grow, you're essentially going to go back there and plant trees to grow carbon and habitat. The pros about this is it does result in very high yields. It very relies on modelling as opposed to direct measurement. So it's actually very cheap and cost effective to run as a project. And it is very much perceived as a high integrity market. Not as much as Savannah, but it's certainly more expensive than soil. So a lot of the big polluting companies really do like to buy AgForce from plantings. Some of the cons, it is a very large investment up front. Somewhere anywhere depending on 1.5 to $10,000 per hectare. That's driven by site specifics and things like that. The weird thing with this, if you're smart about what you're doing, where you're planting, because you need to replant essentially what was there. So the trick is to pick somewhere that has a simple ecosystem and has cheap seedlings. So a common one would be to say, well, I've got a alluvial flat here, and it was a box tree flat or a blue gum or a red gum flat or something like that. They're pretty simple sort of ecosystems. So they are, largely monoculture with aggressive eucalypts that are easy to grow, as opposed to, some of the, more complicated species. So if you think of something like trying to replant a vine scrub, which has 300 species per hectare, it's a bit of a nightmare to get all those species into there and actually have it get off the ground. So that's when you get a very expensive site as opposed to a very cheap site. Some of the other cons, obviously, like you do lose agri production, like you're not in ag anymore, you're a tree grower. There are some grazing, you can graze after you get down the track a bit once the trees get up, but you very much have a period where all grazing is excluded. And they obviously do run a big risk from bushfires and cyclones. There's plenty of people that have known, like there's 1,001 examples of failed plantation trees. Next slide, please, mate. Some of the basic requirements for this stuff it's pretty obvious. Basically, the site It can't have been forest, so you can't clear a forest to then plant a forest, which is, you'd be surprised how many people try that, but that's the most basic one of it. Okay, so it's got to be cleared land that has been cleared prior to planting. Some of the more common one is people tend to target cultivation country, dry land cultivation, because it's already cultivated and it's cheap to prepare. The little nuance in it is the newness clause in it, which is prior to registration of the project. You can't actually start any of the project activities. So you can't sort of gear yourself up. So we're going to start the project next year. So I'm going to get the planter. I'm going to start prepping the paddock or anything like you would with, if you're doing Lacuna, you might do it over 2 years or something. Whereas with plantings, it's very much, here's your window, go do it. Do it as quick as you can. You must actually meet forest country, forest cover, which is 20% canopy, 2 meters in height, which is not hard if you're planting eucalypts generally. As with most projects, they're 25 to 100 years. You just got to check for your approvals. A lot of local councils are not real keen on trees being planted because it's obviously removing from high value ag areas. So if you're basically taking out the sugarcane crop to plant trees, it's not really good for the local community and turnover. Most areas look, it's that 600 mil just for certainty to basically get that seedling up and going. And you can sort of do mallee plantings in lower rainfall areas. So they're really popular in Western Australia, but not so much in Queensland. Next slide, please, mate. And this is the other reason people really like it, because this is your annual yield curve from environmental planning. So the annual sequestration is the bars, and then the cumulative yield in the line. So they ramp up really quick, so getting up to that 5, 6, even 8 tons per hectare per year pretty quick. And obviously that's a pretty good return if the product is a premium as well. So the other thing, once again, this is all modeled. You can do this at the start of your project and know that in year 25, like how many ACCUs you're going to be generating, and you'll be pretty accurate. So as opposed to those other methods which don't allow for that. Next slide, please, mate. So yeah, the total cumulative yield, like 100 to 800 tons per hectare over the 25 years, is pretty common. Like what trees? Well, it's all about risk and opportunity. So just being very smart about what areas you plant. So seeing a few people now trying to plant like spotted gum or some of the more harvestable timber, so that if you've got an area where there is no spotted gum or something on it and hasn't been for it, spotted gum, we'll put it back to that. It's usually not a wonderful soil anyway in a high rainfall area. And theoretically, at the end of the 25 years, you'll be able to selectively harvest some, but probably not all of it, certainly some. Same thing with all the other methods. If you get a big disturbance event, the project is paused, and essentially they wait for the project to catch up again, and that's the same as all of them. There is a little thing in the method, a little glitch in the matrix, if you will, and this thing called belt plantings. So this is a thing called, as opposed to block planting, a belt planting is where you basically do 40-meter wide belts. And because you get that, if anyone's ever seen a tree on the edge of a forest, it'll grow bigger than the ones in the middle. So you can get these bit more of a kick out of your planting by simply planting in belts and not planting the whole thing as a big monoculture. It'll also down the track helps with if you want to go back into grazing, you've got obviously more grass to work with and things like that. So they're becoming quite popular. I think that's that one. Is there any questions on plantings, environmental plantings there?
Nothing in the chat right now, James, but again, everybody, don't hesitate to put your hand up or just sing out if you've got questions.
Yeah, most people in Queensland don't really want to plant trees. Most you're fighting them. Anyway, so these are, we're going to talk about now about sort of the 2 new methods that are coming out. So these aren't active yet. These aren't something you can do now. but they are sort of getting closer and closer and closer. They're ultimately replacing 2 older methods, but the ones we're going to talk about is the IFLM, Integrated Farmland Management, and the Avoided Reclearing and Native Reforestation method. Next slide, please, mate. Pardon me. So the avoided clearing 2.0 is another way to look at it, but essentially what happened, there was a method in Queensland, Australia-wide, called avoided clearing. It was very Queensland specific. It was based around if you had a cycle of clearing, so every 10 years, you would essentially get generate ACCUs by not clearing on the 3rd event. The idea was that that method was too hard. It was a very difficult method because people didn't have records going back 30, 40 years. It was hard to prove. There were lots of glitches in it. So the new method, which is called avoided reclearing and native forestation method, is on its way. The details aren't finalised, but it's proposed to be pretty good because it's got a much broader appeal than the old avoided clearing, because it's much more diverse with what the land types are and the types of vegetation. So the old avoided clearing was either 20% canopy or it wasn't, so it's in or it's out. So it made it a bit sort of hard, whereas with the avoided reclearing and native reforestation, you're combining areas from anywhere from 10% canopy up to over 20. So you just get a bit more variation in that timber, and you can sort of combine carbon pools, which you haven't been able to do in the past. The other big thing is it's basically based on one clearing event. So no more these big cycles. You just need that one clearing event in the last sort of 20 odd years, and then you become eligible. So it simplifies that part. It is obviously running into a lot of troubles with the new EPBC laws, so in the 15-year rule. So there's some big questions to be asked about parts of this method. There are some other big questions being asked because they're proposing a different permanence period. Instead of the old 25, 100, they're proposing 50, 75, 100. The problem with that is no one actually has. They have to change the Carbon Farming Act through Parliament to get those dates available. So it's not as simple as people would like. The crediting is also probably pretty important. So the original avoided clearing was massive, big payment up front and lots of little ones trailing. They're trying to even this out and base it more on a sequestration model and less stacking of the front half of the system, and then even those credits out. So it'll be horses for courses. It'll suit some people, but not everyone.
And James, it's Vol. Sorry, that avoided clearing in Queensland will be, for practical purposes, it'll be limited to Category X country for people if they're thinking about where it might be applicable.
Yeah, it'll only be Category X. And then if it's with the EPBC stuff, so if it's an endangered RE, so if it's Brox, Brigalow, Blue Gum, like you won't be able to clear it, so it'll narrow it down pretty quick. So you'll have to do a bit of digging to see if it's relevant.
Thanks.
So the next one is the IFLM, Integrated Farmland Management Method. They've been talking about this since 2017, and they still haven't quite got it yet. But anyway, this is largely to replace the old one, which was called human-induced regeneration, which is the most common method. So it's where about 80% of Australia's ACCUs are generated out of. And essentially it was shut down a couple of years ago, and this is the method to replace it. It's meant to be a pretty good method for a number of reasons, the new IFLM, because the idea is you can combine certain carbon pools where you can take sort of a bit of planting over here and a bit of regeneration over here and combine certain activities and sort of, so it's a bit more bespoke for individual farms to sort of say, well, I want a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And it's meant to be more flexible. There are some compromises there with some of the requirements around mapping and eligibility are a lot higher, and that's a resulting of the Chubb review. So there's a lot of, not sure people might have even seen, there was an article in Beef Central yesterday or day before from Eric Barker and the guys. He was talking to one of the carbon companies, and they're explaining how essentially it's going to make their business almost unviable because the requirements are too high. But anyway, it'll hopefully evolve into something usable for producers. The good thing about it is it looks like it'll just be a standard 25 or 100-year permanence period. So most people go to 25 years. And essentially, there'll be that little component in there where if you've got small regrowth that's under 5% canopy or something that it'll probably, I think it's going to be based on biomass for some reason. You know, small trees, you're going to grow them into big trees. And that's the regeneration section of IFLM. But once again, not live, not yet. Watch this space, and obviously will be affected by EPBC regulations as well. Next slide, please, Mo. Any questions on those possible new myths? I'll answer them where I can.
None in the chat there. There could be some hands about to pop up, but while we're waiting, I've got a quick one. You mentioned the Chubb review. James, I might have missed that, but what was the Chubb review?
We'll dive into it in this section, mate. So we'll go
Cool.
through. This is the next part, and we'll talk about Chubb review and a few other bits and pieces.
Excellent.
So
we got no questions, everyone? I think we're all good.
Right. So this is just some more generic, general advice about how people with projects and other things you should think about if you are going to undertake a project. So some of the key point that I tell everyone who's thinking about going into project is you need to have access to your credits. A lot of people say that you need to keep all the credits for yourself because you might need them. It's not quite right. I think the much sensible way to look at it is you simply need access to them should you need them. So when you're doing your contract with your provider, or if you're doing it yourself, it's probably no drama. But if you're using a provider like most people do, like the carbon company, you just want to make sure that in that contract that you have access to those credits should you need them. And it needs to be very black and white, like spelled out really black and white, to the point that if they fail to do that, you can exit the contract. If it doesn't say something that black and white, well, that's probably where you need to draw a line with that provider. Why would you need access to credits? Well, this will most likely scenario I think this will be is if you using a small number of credits to access a market or avoid a price point penalty. But I think we probably talked about it in one of the earlier webinars, but essentially there's not a lot of premiums for carbon neutral or low carbon product. There's not much premium or anything out there for it. There's a little bit of opportunity for people who are vertically integrated, for large companies. And then you start getting into things like insetting and international credits and things like that, because it's not really the purpose of an ACU to be inset. They're worth too much, basically, so people tend to sell them. Next slide, please, mate. So here's a basic example of how this might actually work. So if you get a carbon project off the ground, you say, well, I might want to, why do I need access to my credits? Well, a large processor might add an emissions intensity onto a grid of a high value line like EU. So this is, and it probably would be EU just because they've got all the regulations under the sun. So it's probably likely to come from the European Union market, which is our biggest growth market now with the free trade agreement with the British. So they essentially say something along the lines of your GAF intensity is 15 kilograms of live weight, and it needs to be 13. So if you did those early webinars with Brady and Mo on last night, and you looked at the GAF and the calculator, so well, this is my intensity. I need to drop it. If I need to do it in a hurry, rather than going through all these processes, I need to adjust my breeding, I need to do all these things a real quick way. So I'll just grab a wedge of credits, attach it to my product, and I'll drop it. So it's the shortest path to drop your emissions is to use X number of credits to drop your emissions intensity. So that's just a practical example of why you might need access to your credits. You could run the same scenario with a bank, that the best interest rate is here, but your emissions intensity or your total emissions is out of range, or we haven't got a plan or something like that. Next one, please, mate. And this is speaking to the Chubb review now, which is that the changes in the existing system. It's really changed the whole carbon game a fair bit. It's why the new methods are going to be a lot more difficult. There's going to be a lot more mapping and a lot more checks. This ultimately is also why the carbon in Australia is worth so much money, is because it is a very highly regulated system. But so back in 2023, we had the release of the Chubb Review, and the Chubb Review was basically reviewing all the integrity problems with the old HIR projects, the old human-induced regeneration projects. Pardon me, because there was lots of problems with those projects. There was basically credits where there shouldn't be credits. There was also, people who should have been getting credits that weren't. But probably the worst case scenario, I think I heard in it, that I think someone had within their project there was it was meant to be all regenerating mulga, but within that mulga there was about a 5,000 hectare clay pan that would never grow anything, and apparently it was getting registered generating credits. So that's a really good example of something where the integrity wasn't stacking up. So they changed the reporting requirements. And so now every 5 years, projects are required to go through these things called gateway checks. Gateway checks are going to be inbuilt to all new projects, but they're now being applied to outstanding or original or ongoing projects. Is essentially, this is initiated by the regulator to make sure that the regeneration is actually occurring. Next slide, please, Mo. Next slide, please, Mo.
Wrong channel in there. Here
Yep.
we go.
There we go. So there's a little niche thing here. So if you're pardon me, if you've got an existing project and you registered in, say, 2015, 16, 17, sort of in that period, you're going to get probably caught up in this a little bit, because what happened in the original one, where there was no gateway checks, you could just keep poking along. So the initial stratification, we were looking at, very high level, like, 1,000 to 1,000 hectare scale. So very zoomed out, what's there. And the regeneration at year 6, now we're zooming in a bit more, we're going to a 100 hectare scale. And then at year 10, we're going into a 10 hectare scale. And obviously at the end, we want to have forest cover over as much of the CEA as possible. Looking at like 0.2 of a hectare, so pretty granular. But what's happened is we've had producers come in who've registered projects in that 15 to 17 year time frame, and they skipped their year 6 regeneration check because it didn't exist, and now they're coming in straight up with a 10-year regeneration health check. So their gateway check, sorry, and so it's a big change to go from measuring stuff at 1,000 hectare scale down to a 10 hectare scale. And essentially, we actually have seen some people have to pay back credits. So this is the only live example of where credits have to be paid back. So if you have projects that are registered in that timeframe, I suggest you look into this, talk to your carbon provider, talk to AgForce, talk to me, talk to someone, because there are some pretty big red flags for people who are those early adopters in 15, 16, 17, possibly 18, who are going to basically go straight from a year 1 to a year 10 project. I think that's next slide. I think that might be him. Oh, no. So just a bit of a wrap up, I suppose. That the game has changed around integrity. So, and this is ultimately a good thing because it drives the price. So the one thing this does mean is that as they continually ratchet up the integrity of these markets, the result is that the price will stay up. So the current carbon price, I think, is about $36 a tonne, the generic, with premiums up around that $80. So it's a pretty good place to be, dollars wise, and that's likely going to stay up, particularly with the safeguard mechanism and the big polluters are being forced into buying these credits. So the opportunity will remain. That's not going to go anyway. The goalposts have shifted, but that's just a young industry. The goalpost shifts. It's only, you got to remember this industry is only 10 years old, so it's not unreasonable to expect it's going to see some changes. Please understand your position and your relationship with your provider if you use one. It's very important that you need to understand what your rights are, whose roles are what, and what your responsibilities are. If you don't know and you need help, please reach out. There's plenty of people like us who will provide advice to that. And understand the key drivers of your project. If you're doing soil, like it's all about rotation. If you're planting trees, it's all about protecting those trees. If it's about regeneration, it's about management practices that promote regeneration. So understanding what actually drives the ACCU. I tend to find most people have a really wonderful understanding about what drives their beef production, but they get a bit vague about what actually drives their ACCU production. So if you can dial in on that, and that's the difference between people getting really good results from projects and people getting mediocre results. That's it from me. Thanks, Bowl. I'll hand back to Bowl or Mo for someone to talk about the participant survey.
Excellent. I'm just there's no more questions in the chat at the moment. There's probably some questions hovering around. But James, before I just flick them over, you mentioned contact you a few times. You're happy for us to include your details, so we'll circulate to everybody who's online James's contact details for you to pursue further questions. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody, for attending, and thanks, James, for your presentation. I've put a link to the chat, link to the survey in the chat, as well as the QR code. You can see the QR code on the screen. If you could please complete the survey. When you are completing the survey, the first question is, who is the provider? If you type in AGF, then AgForce Queensland Farmers will come up, and click on that. And then the second question is, what is the workshop? And if you type in ONL, it will come up with online practical webinars. It will actually be Series 2 carbon farming methods, because last week was Series 1. And you select that, and then the rest is self-explanatory. So if you could please have a go at doing the surveys, that would be muchly appreciated, because GGA collects all the results of that and hands that back to the government. So now is your opportunity. If you want to have a fair say to the government about some changes that you need made, here's your chance, because these survey results go straight back to the government. So time to speak up and say you want more research on something, or you want other types of carbon farming methods, or you want changes. Put them in the survey and let them be heard.
James, I've got a question. Those two new replacement methodologies yet to come out. Any hints on when they might be, or is it too hard to tell?
No, it should be, within the sort of the next 6 months. The federal government's throwing a lot of money at them to try and get them across the line, because they're both overdue. And yeah, I think the IFLM, so basically the regeneration of small trees one should be out sooner than the other one. The avoided clearing one, you're probably looking close to the end of 2026, as opposed to probably, I suppose, about August for the IFLM. But I've been wrong on that one before, mate. So happy to be wrong again. But
Good one, mate. Thanks.
You'll know when they come out, because you'll probably get a phone call from a carbon provider or two wanting to know if you want to do a project.
Excellent. Thanks for that. And in general terms, James, the review, the Chubb review, it sounds like that addressed some real shortcomings, and it also sounds like it's kind of come up with some genuine solutions to those. Is that your assessment?
Yeah, mate. I think it basically did address some of the shortcomings. Not all of them. So, there's still a lot of problems with carbon projects done wrong in rural communities and things like that. So there are adverse side effects of large human-induced regeneration, large regeneration projects in Western Queensland that probably really weren't addressed at a community level. But ultimately the technical side, because the review was done by academics, I suppose the technical side was reviewed quite well. And that essentially makes the product worth more money. So I think in any industry, if you can make the product worth more money, that's a good thing. But you also don't want to make it so hard or unattainable that producers can't have a crack and make the money in the first place. So, there's still a lot of holes in the system. It's not a perfect one. I'd like to see some more industry-led methodologies, you know, like the industry's bodies, they've had a crack, but I'd like to see them have another crack at trying to get some, you know, very industry specific methods up to that, what landholders want to do basically.
Yeah, right. And it sounds like a level of comfort with documentation and recording data is pretty essential if you're going to get into it.
Yeah, that's right, mate. I think there's been a few people caught out because they were told by someone, oh, you don't have to do this, we'll do that. And then they get 6 months down the track or a year down the track, and all of a sudden they're going, oh, where's this piece of paper? And you say, well, you didn't tell me I need that. So being crystal clear and having all your communications in email is another good thing too.
Yeah, okay. And there could be some people online who have got projects who might have information to add on this, but I see Claire, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Yes, James, I was just wondering, thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of questions. Do you dabble at all in the biodiversity credit schemes and have any knowledge on those?
Yeah, yep. So when there's a generic term called biodiversity schemes, pardon me, and that covers two very distinct types. One, what's commonly referred as like the nature repair methods or the accounting for nature, where essentially you landscape condition. So one way to think of it is you undertake a real simple one is you undertake a tree planting methodology and you plant trees for carbon. And then on top of that, you overlay a bird method. So you say, well, beforehand there was no birds, and now we've planted trees and there's birds in the trees. So we get a credit based on the number of birds that come into those trees. The market is very much leaning that way, like the government's pushing that very, very hard. The reality of those types of projects is that very little of them have sold. Like there's no real there's a couple of small examples here and there, but there's not big examples of people getting paid specifically for those credits. They do work well for a carbon multiplier. So instead of your carbon being worth $40 a ton, you've got the people out there, you've got surveyors, you've got people walking around your property, you put whatever, a bird method over the top, whatever it might be, and then your carbon might go from worth $40 a ton to be $50 a ton or something like that. So that's the sort of the nature repair methods. The other type are environmental offsets. So this is when a mine, a wind farm or a mine wants to basically go out and build something. And for every hectare they disturb, they roughly need about 4 hectares of country somewhere else to replace it. And it's an environmental offset. So what they'll do is they'll have a total disturbance side of 100 hectares, and they'll need to go find basically 400 hectares of the same type of country on someone's private land. Generally speaking, got to be category X. It's got to be like for like. So if it's squatter pigeon habitat or koala habitat, they've got to go find squatter pigeon habitat or koala habitat on your place. These offsets that you've got to be close to a mine or a wind farm or something like that to get them, or in southeast corner, like anywhere there's residential development. They are quite lucrative for the landholders because you can still graze your cattle, but you just have to rotate them in and out of those areas. So if it's, for argument's sake, it's squatter pigeons, they nest on the ground between, I think it's November and January. So you'll just have to exclude cattle between November and January. And then they'll pay you quite well to fence that, look after it, and basically rotate your cattle through it. So that's the two big spheres of the biodiversity market. So I'm not sure which one you're referring to. Were you referring to one in particular there, Claire, or was that answering your question? I hope I answered it.
Dropped out there, but yeah, I was just looking for the one that like how you get paid for your bird life and your koalas and you know, all of the lovely native wildlife that we do have here. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for explaining that.
Yep.
Thanks, Claire. Any more questions on James's presentation? I think you've saturated.
You can do EPBC or anything else while we're going if you want.
Let's open that. Let's open that Pandora's box. EPBC, is everyone aware of the recent changes to the EPBC Act? There'll be a screaming silence from everybody.
No, I'm not.
Riley, go ahead, Riley. Oh, you're not aware of, do you want to give us a quick summary, James?
For what, sorry?
The EPBC stuff.
Right.
Perhaps I'll start and you can pick up, James. So recently the federal government introduced passed some legislation which is changes to the Federal Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, and the effect on agriculture is to make it very likely that a number of activities on farms which hitherto have been standard activities might now be captured by these regulations, and there's a possibility of having to submit proposals for approval under the new Act for things like new fencing and water points and so forth. So AgForce has been busy trying to get a series of agricultural management activities that are excluded specifically. So that's a bit of a kickstart. James, maybe you want to elaborate.
Yeah, so basically there's changes. If you're looking to clear regrowth, you really need to understand that there are changes. A lot of the times you still can clear. It's just a bit of a different process, and it's a bit of a wait and see approach is what most landholders are taking at the moment. But please be aware that you can still ultimately clear a lot of different ways. It's a bit more of a process, I suppose, is the way to look at it. I was just seeing the chat there. We got O'Reilly, can Cadex trees over 15 years be used for environmental offsets? Theoretically, yes. So that's if a wind farm or someone wants to come along. These used to be the very trees they targeted. They were very excited about trying to find 15-year-old trees. So technically, if they're in Cadex, yes, they would be, because under the state, if you do an environmental offset, it'll basically change the colour of your PMAV. It'll go from white to blue or pink, pink, I think. Category A, which is the pink stuff on the environmental on the Queensland Globe. So essentially, yeah, that's how that works. Claire, did you have another question? I thought you were going to ask a question before. Sorry, did I talk over the top here?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was. It was just back on the like soil carbon projects. They go for 25 years, and I just was wondering, like, what happens if there's a registered project on that piece of land and it sells? If you purchase it, do you have to continue with that project, or does that project just sort of terminate if you don't wish to enter into it? Yeah, I'm just wondering, because 25 years is quite a long time.
Yeah, so the risk, it goes with the land. So if the project is on the land and you want to sell it within the 25 years, that person has to undertake that project. If you desperately want to sell and you have to sell, and that person doesn't want to take that project on, someone's got to pay those credits back, and it's a bit of a negotiated process. So the general rule is basically you probably want to try and not pay back credits where possible. So if you're going to sell, try and sell to someone who wants to continue with the project. So I think the rule of thumb is most corporates are pretty keen to buy property. So the big polluters are all trying to buy properties, which I sort of disagree with, because it's putting property prices up a bit more, because they're trying to buy properties with projects.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for clearing that up for me.
Another question there in the chat from Riley. So does that mean that the federal government hasn't captured these 15-year-old trees for the LULUCs?
Yeah, land use and land use change. That's a good question. I think it depends. My understanding is no, that they haven't captured, because basically the land use change is essentially the national carbon account. Their mapping doesn't move that quick. So the 15-year-old, you've got this kind of strange situation where the state government mapping is picking stuff up quicker than the Fed government mapping. So it's a bit of a funny one, and it only really gets sorted out once someone goes on ground and tries to do something with it. So at a high level, it's not really been captured. But yeah, I could take the cynical view that this is a really simple way for the federal government to essentially increase their national account without having to pay landholders for it, if I was cynical. But I'm not that cynical.
today anyway.
No, they wouldn't
Okay.
have, they wouldn't have ever done that before, would they?
No. Can't see any more in the chat, and no hands popping up. Has anyone got any final questions before we hand back to Mo? Looks like we're all good. Mo, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody, for participating tonight. I hope you got something out of it, and please, yeah, hope you've filled in the survey for tonight. That would be great.
Frozen in Croydon.
We might, yeah, see you around somewhere. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Thank you.
James. Thanks.